believe it or not, the actual expression terrorism is not even a recognised quantification by the international world.
Well, can I just come in on that one? I mean, that's because terrorism covers a whole multitude of different activities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
I wanted it to. It could.
Yeah. I prefer to use the word acts of violence because it's more straightforward.
And bringing this question in, we're talking about assassination is a form of terrorism, but it's safer to assassinate somebody than to pull up a car bomb.
Oh, it is. But I mean, but as you know, there's a whole spectrum of different possibilities of things that you can do, isn't there?
Well, my intention when I thought about this was also to bring into the possibility that the world is getting used to the idea that terrorism is an acceptable strategy. It's not a conventional strategy. So what I would suggest is why don't the legislative bodies of this world instead talk about individual assassinations? I mean, if terrorism is going to exist, and if these things are going to happen, why don't we promote individual assassinations as a more intelligent, safer method of answering the same question?
Well, I mean, to be honest,
Mossad did this recently.
Yeah, to be honest with you, you see, what we call terrorism is sometimes called revolutionary warfare or guerrilla warfare. In British Army training, it's called counter-revolutionary warfare or revolutionary warfare. Now, these kind of techniques have become the cutting edge of where the military's going. You've got one end, you've got your nuclear bomb. At the other end, you've got your car bomb. And as the old Irish joke has it, how do you know which ones are the terrorists? They're the ones with the small bombs. Terrorism potentially could be much more discriminate than conventional warfare, potentially, or it could be more indiscriminate. It just depends on who's doing it and what goals they have. By and large, of course, we want to discourage people from acts of violence for their political goals, full stop.
Yeah.
They should do their politics in a political way.
As Martin just said, we're looking for a civil doorway of opportunity for many countries that currently depend upon terrorism, instead to provide them with a more civilized opportunity through politics, through debate, and hopefully convince them that terrorism is not the answer, irrespectively.
This whole business of targeting, I think, I find absolutely fascinating, because we did see during the long IRA bombing campaign, which is now over, thank God. I mean, there is a ceasefire going in Northern Ireland right now. So can I just make my point? Can I just make my point, which is that there was a lot of difference over the years between the different types of targeting. I mean, I was actually working as a journalist in London, and I saw a big change, whereas the IRA started targeting the large city institutions, in other words, going for property rather than going for these individual assassinations, like been happening in previous years.
Martin, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to... I've got a book here. It's written by Brigadier Michael Dewar, Brushfire Wars, Minor Campaigns of the British Army since 1945. And here is his quote about the Northern Ireland conflict. He says, "The emergency in Northern Ireland from 1969 to 1990, when this book was written, has been a tragic episode in the history of the United Kingdom. It was probably inevitable, given the incredible attitudes of successive Ulster governments to the Catholic minority in the post-war years. The speeches from Stormont's Hansard are breathtaking in their bold sectarianism. The Minister for Labour answers a written question at one point. It was totally untrue that out of 31 porters at Stormont, 28 were Roman Catholics. This was nothing but a smear. There are 30 Protestants and 1 Roman Catholic, and the Roman Catholic is only temporary." Even Prime Minister Terence O'Neill, who some loyalists thought far too liberal, said in Canada in the 1960s, "It's frightfully hard to explain to Protestants that if you give Roman Catholics a good job and a good house, they will live like perfectly decent Protestants." Out of this bigotry grew the civil rights movement, which Pat was a part of, which created a perfect wagon for the IRA band. Now that's the view of Brigadier Michael Dewar.
Okay, Richard, we're going to have to wind up in a minute, but I will ask you one final question, which is: do you think there is ever likely to be an inquiry into Pat Finucane's death?
That's an interesting question, but the Finucane family are not interested in any inquiry based upon the new Inquiries Act 2005, because they think that it won't provide a fair scrutiny publicly and it's too balanced in the government of the British, in the interests of the British government, who can run the whole thing from the executive, basically. So they're not interested. But having said that, the British government are also not interested in giving him an opportunity or an inquiry because he was a terrorist.
Well, these inquiries are governed, which is, and the acts have changed since 2005, and many people believe for the worst. Richard will be back next week to tell you about why the Inquiries Act 2005 has been alienating those it's supposedly trying to help. So thanks very much, Richard.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all for this week. Coming up next is the Sky News at 7 o'clock. Do please join us at 5 on Friday Drive Time each week here on BCFM 93.2. Where via our Barton Hill transmitter we review the week's news and discuss some of the big stories in Bristol, Britain and around the world and bring you the city's top investigative reports. If you want us to look into a story, have questions about this evening's programme or would like to suggest a guest for a future show, please email me at tony@bcfm.org.uk. Thanks very much to this week's guest, Conservative Councillor for Henbury in the first hour, Chris Windows. Thanks also to our resident Old Labour pundit, Oxford economist Martin Summers, and Marina Morris for this week's report and Vox Pop, as well as Richard Cowley for the report you just heard. If you're on broadband internet, you can hear all previous Friday Drive Times, including my hour-long investigative report into mobile phone and broadband wireless network safety, and find out what's coming up next week by going to bcfm.org.uk and clicking on presenters or podcasts to find my page. A podcast of this show is usually online by midnight after broadcast. Up next, it's Somali language programming with Nemo and Somali Youth. I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a relaxing and enjoyable weekend.
You are listening to BCFM 93.2.
BCFM is the community radio station for Bristol. It is run by volunteers and is here to give everybody in Bristol a voice.